Okay, here we go. Focus. Speed. I am speed.
Imagine taking a one-cut running back, souping his speed up to 99 in Madden, and sticking him out wide as a receiver. What would he play like? In taking a look at Tennessee's Velus Jones Jr., that's exactly what we're going to answer.
Big time, swings it down the sideline, he's got a man on the run.
Throw scooped up off the turf by Jones, breaks free. Jones to the 10, touchdown.
Cutting it back inside, still on his feet, and an extraordinary return inside the... Hendon Hooker down the middle for a touchdown, Tennessee and Velus Jones.
Jones is an extremely unique player, and there's a lot you can say about him. He's a no-doubt speed threat, he's a nasty blocker, he's one of the most contact-happy wide receivers I've ever seen, he's a very talented punt and kick returner, and he's the oldest pick in the 2022 NFL Draft's first 6 rounds because, yes, there is someone older than him in the 7th. He's not a particularly great route runner. He never logged even 300 yards receiving in a season until his 6th year of school, and he's without a doubt the most intriguing player to project in the 2022 Chicago Bears offense. My name is Robert Schmitz, and in this quick breakdown, we'll talk through Velus' strengths, weaknesses, and fit within the new Bears offense with some player comps and expectations thrown in for good measure. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Velus Jones is blazing fast, and you can see it all over his tape. Whether he's catching a bubble screen and creating yardage after the catch, roasting flat-footed corners on slot fades and deep goes, or taking punts and kicks back to the house, Jones's performance in the SEC makes it pretty clear that his speed isn't just a fancy testing number, it's a weapon out on the football field. But if you've been following the NFL for at least a few years, you've probably heard this kind of talk before. Cautionary tales like John Ross in Cincinnati, Tavon Austin with the then St. Louis Rams, J.J. Nelson with Arizona, Darius Hayward-Bay with Oakland, and all sorts of others have shown us you can't just run a fast 40-yard dash and expect success in the NFL. So what does Jones do differently than those names? Well, for starters, he's not a first-round pick, so I think our expectations for him can be much more realistic than the other names already mentioned. But Jones has 4 major traits to his game that, when combined, create a player I think has a real chance at success in the NFL. Number 1, his burst. Number 2, his technique on deeper routes. Number 3, his toughness, both at the catch point and as a runner. And 4, his ferocity as a blocker, which all help create a more complete receiver that's just as useful when he isn't getting the ball as when he is, which is often the problem with a lot of the other high-profile speed threats. But we'll get into the off-ball stuff later. First, let's talk about the fun stuff, starting with Jones's burst. If you follow the draft much, you probably hear this word a lot, but what does it really mean? In this case, I'm referring to how quickly Jones can ramp up from 3rd gear to 5th gear, which messes with defensive pursuit angles on screens and helps create separation deep downfield. Let's look at an example of each scenario, starting with this deep route from his bowl game against Purdue. It's 3rd and 4, so the Boilermakers, who look like they're in a man blitz, put a safety over the top of Velus about 2 yards past the sticks. Now because it's 3rd down, I'm sure the safety is watching for a basic short route, like an in, an out, or even a slant, but Velus has the green light to go deep, and that's going to let us see just how dangerous his burst can be. Jones starts off with a quick stem that forces the safety to honor a short route before planting his foot and exploding past the flat-footed DB, creating instant downfield separation that's wasted with a poor throw. But I couldn't care less about the result of the play. Look again at just how quickly Velus chews up ground here. The safety recognizes what's coming, flipping his hips about a yard in advance, but Velus' top gear is just too hot to handle, and the poor defender had no chance to keep up. Had the throw been any better, it's a huge gain through the air. And because I can't stop watching Velus blow past people, let's look at one more. Against Kentucky, also on 3rd down, Tennessee catches the boundary safety in conflict on a sweet post-slot fade combo that leaves Velus Jones matched up against a linebacker going deep. Goodness gracious, the backer never had a chance. Once Jones hit the burners, he was long gone. Jones's burst can also open seams for him on short yak-oriented plays. Against South Carolina on, would you believe it, another 3rd down, Velus caught a ball in space after a questionably legal pick downfield and, after a quick cut, hit the Jets and scored easily. But take a look at this again. Sure, Velus' speed takes this linebacker out of the play, but by the time Velus curls upfield, this corner has a clear shot at cutting Jones off if only he didn't misjudge just how fast Velus is and bite down towards the runner with his first step. Velus, already in 5th gear, ends up past the corner before he's ever touched and blasts into the end zone because of that insane ability to burst forward. Jones also does a very good job of consistently getting his man to make the first move when he's working deep from the slot, and there's no better example of that than this play against South Carolina. Velus is one-on-one versus a man coverage safety on a deep post over the middle, so when the Gamecocks 7-man blitz gets frozen by play action, Velus immediately makes them pay. But check out his technique on this route. Velus and his man both know he's a speed threat on everything from a straight go to a slot fade to a post, so Jones waits patiently until his man opens his hips before snapping his route inside and creating easy separation. Velus is particularly good at these one-cut deeper routes, where if the DB doesn't open his hips during his stem, Jones will stutter and blast right by. This helps Velus steer clear of mid-route jams and create space in the deep third of the field, a skill I'm sure the Bears will try to make use of in 2022. Velus is also shockingly physical, both as a blocker and as a runner. Many receivers don't particularly like contact and get easily outmuscled by defenders, but Velus is strong as a blocker and set up multiple big plays by squaring up his man, getting his hands on their shoulders, and using all 200 pounds of his muscle to dig out rushing lanes. And speaking of rushing, Jones's contact balance is that of a running back's. Arm tackles just aren't enough, as these Mizzou defenders have demonstrated for us, and he's more than willing to take the ball back inside if it means gaining more yards rather than just running out of bounds like a normal receiver might. When you get him the ball in space, good things consistently happen. And yes, that even includes the occasional handoff in the backfield. Velus is a fast, physical deep threat whose positional versatility on the offense draws enough defensive attention to create openings for his teammates like the one you see here. And I think that bodes better for his NFL career than that of other returner-turned-receivers we've seen in the league. He's also not exclusively screener deep. There is a possession element to his game that he's developing, but for the sake of keeping this breakdown brief, it's time we discuss Velus' weaknesses, or at the very least, what his shortcomings are, as well as what they aren't. Let's start off with something I think doesn't matter, and that's Velus Jones' age. If you've spent any time on Twitter in the month of May, you probably heard all sorts of jokes about how Velus is older than DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Hollywood Brown, and a host of other very talented players. He's 2 full years older than Justin Fields. He's a few months older than Darnell Mooney. You get it, I get it, he's old. But here's the thing. Velus Jones is a 3rd round pick, a round traditionally aimed at finding a productive role player, not a 10-year Pro Bowler. If we were talking about a 1st or 2nd round pick, I'd understand the hand-wringing, but we're not. In the 3rd round, I might draft a 65-year-old if he could run a 4.31 second 40-yard dash at 200 pounds and toast a bunch of guys at the Senior Bowl. You see what I did there? You can't teach speed, and Velus Jones undoubtedly has plenty of speed. Add in that he's been relatively healthy throughout his 6-year college career, playing in 11.6 games per season, and I just don't think it's worth getting hung up on Velus' 2nd contract age before he's even proved he'll finish his 1st deal. What you should be worried about with Velus is his agility, or I should say his complete lack thereof. Jones accelerates and puts on the brakes well, making him ideal for the deeper routes we discussed earlier as well as basic curls, but if you ask him to turn a full 90 degrees on an in, out, or dig route, you'll end up disappointed. If you turn on Velus' Tennessee tape and look for these routes, you won't see him accelerate before trying an out or in. Instead, he basically skips off the line and attempts to threaten the defender deep without actually accelerating before turning over his outside shoulder for an easy gain. Between the 20s, this isn't terrible. Jones is threatening, so there's nothing wrong with taking advantage of defensive cushion, but in the red zone, I think the issue speaks for itself, where since he only uses this release on short breakers, he's easily clamped down on by this Purdue defender and leads to a red zone sack, in overtime no less. And just in case you don't know what an out route is supposed to look like, here's a nice rep from Dante Pettis, who coincidentally is now a Chicago Bear. Not everything comes back to testing numbers, but Velus Jones' Pro Day agility scores only make this problem clearer. With a 4.51 second 20-yard shuttle and a 7.32 second 3-cone drill, his scores place him in the bottom 20% of historic receiver agility testing. And if you're wondering why this matters, it's purely because this means that Velus may not fit the traditional traditional slot receiver role particularly well, where often players win with short area quickness on routes like ins, outs, and even more complex juke or option routes and other things of that nature. The good news for Jones is that the Bears staff clearly knows this is an issue and are working on exactly these kinds of routes, but Jones still has a ways to go. This is a preseason rep, so take it with a grain of salt, but you can see Jones run a much more normal release off the line before cutting towards the sidelines. The trouble is, I think he drifts a bit too far backwards as he cuts, and that Simeon's throw might have been on target had Jones stuck to the 5-yard out that this play normally calls for, rather than drifting back to about 6 yards depth and the throw falling incomplete. I can't say for sure I know Jones ran the wrong route here, but his cut isn't even a full 90 degrees and it's still about as round as these breaks will get. He'll be fine on slants, posts, corners, goes, drags, and curls. All these breaks are only 45-degree angles, but I worry about his long-term performance on everything else. Suffice it to say, I don't think timing routes will ever be his strength. And then there's the fact that Velus never performed well in college outside of his first year in Josh Heupel's new-look Tennessee offense. Look, I could tell you that coaches misuse guys all the time, or make the argument that not cracking the field behind a loaded stable of USC receivers isn't a demerit, but there's a particular player that's worth bringing up that I think Velus's role will emulate, because coincidentally enough, the Bears' new offensive coordinator Luke Getsy coached him for the last 3 years in Green Bay. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, a former 5th-round pick, never once caught more than 300 yards at NC State before transferring to South Florida, where he still never caught more than 415 yards until he was a 5th-year senior. But what was he? He was a well-built burner, clocking in with a 4.37-second 40-yard dash at 206 pounds, and if we fast forward to 2021, we see that he's carved out a nice role for himself as a predominantly outside receiver with a lot of versatility that blocks hard on screens, functions as the primary sweep threat on jet motions, and occasionally kicks inside the formation to threaten the defense deep. Sound familiar? I think Velus Jones fits this role perfectly. It's not that he and MVS are the same player per se, but they have a very similar skill set that complements their featured Z receiver, which for Chicago is Darnell Mooney. Whether MVS was clearing space or exploiting space with his speed, he freed up more room for Davante Adams to work, and I would imagine that Chicago's going to try to do the same with Velus Jones. I also think that MVS's statistical output offers us a great baseline to judge Velus's rookie season off of. In a healthy offense, I think a 400 to 600 yard season makes sense with high yards per reception that's balanced by a low catch rate due to so many of his targets coming deep. Now, will the Bears offense be healthy in 2022? That's up for debate, but nevertheless we need something to compare Velus to, and I think this works. And hey, you never know. If Justin Fields, who we know loves to throw deep, builds a connection with Jones downfield, that may just be the missing piece the Bears receiver room needs to emulate last year's Green Bay attack. Now, you may be wondering why I didn't bring up a certain San Francisco receiver in the comparison section, especially since the Bears' own GM couldn't help but bring him up.
He can help in many different ways. Almost, I'm not going to compare him to Debo, but he has that flexibility.
In my opinion, Debo Samuel is one of a kind, and I don't think anyone really warrants comparison to him, but because polls brought his name up, it's clear he and Getsy have some kind of plan for using Velus beyond just a receiver with deep threat potential. Now, how crazy will they get? I couldn't tell you, especially since Velus had 1 rushing carry last year compared to Debo's staggering 59 attempts. But I will leave this one little factoid here. When you compare Velus Jones' raw athletic score against running backs rather than wide receivers, he athletically compares to Titans legend Chris Johnson as well as former Falcons starter Tevin Coleman. So hey, maybe there's something there. Velus Jones will be exciting to follow for all the reasons that make football fun. At 25 years old, he's a testament to never giving up on his dreams and continuing to pursue a career in NFL football. Plus, he's got the speed and contact balance to make any play, be it a punt return, a screen, or a deep throw downfield, a potential highlight. I think he'll be a nice role player for Chicago this year, and their receiver room certainly needs him. But will he be able to overcome his agility issues? Can he refine his route running so late in his football career? And how will Chicago go about trying to Debo-ify Velus Jones? For those answers, we'll just have to wait and see. But I, for one, cannot wait to find out. Thanks so much for watching this video. Every single bit of support helps, so make sure you comment below your thoughts on Velus Jones. Are you excited? Are you frustrated? Did you want somebody else in that slot? So that we can pump some engagement and get this video out to as many Bears fans as possible. I know there's a lot of things changing on the channel, but I appreciate your support, and truly, I am going to be doing exactly what I always do, and if anything, I'm hoping the new team behind me pushes me to make just a little bit more. I feel like we're really starting to find our voice. This video was much easier to make than a lot of the ones in the past were, so I'm looking forward to a great season of Chicago Bears content, regardless of what happens on the field, and as always, I'm excited to get back into all 22 streaming. Speaking of that, the date for that this year may switch from Wednesday. We may see if we can bump it up to Tuesday, so again, whether you need to keep tabs on the community tab or comment below that doesn't work for you, we may try to move out of the slot that we've been running in because 9 p.m. on Wednesday is not perfect for everybody, but we'll talk about it later. For now, Bears fans, bear down, and thanks so much for bearing with me.